Tomorrow. That's because it is. Most of the country will spring ahead by 1 hour at 2 a.m., marking the start of daylight savings time. But not everyone is feeling the squeeze, right? You've got Hawaii, Puerto Rico, most of Arizona, and then some U.S. territories won't be resetting.
Otherwise known as the smarter areas among us.
Exactly.
I don't understand daylight savings time.
I hate daylight saving, and especially when you become a parent, I didn't realize babies don't automatically adjust to daylight savings time.
You said that it's so much worse with a kid. I feel like there's a lot of things that are worse with a kid. Hangovers?
You would say that. Hangovers are much worse with the kid. Being sick.
Traveling.
Yeah, but there's a lot of pros. Why you got to focus on the negatives? The laughter, the getting to see the world through their eyes.
This is inspiring.
Leland, I'm not selling Leland on becoming a dad anytime soon.
Considering your night last night, I'm surprised you're looking at the positives. You look pretty good, though, for not having gotten much sleep last night. It was training for tonight.
I know.
With no sleep as well.
It was bad. It was
rough. All right. These dogs, I'm going to try this as a transition. These 52 teams of sled dogs are going to sleep really well, along with their mushers, once they have already crossed the more than 500 miles of ice and snow in the Iditarod race. The winner will cross the finish line of the 1,000-mile race sometime next week. We don't hear the guy yelling mush, 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 though. You brought up a good question, though. The dogs look happy.
Well, you hear so much from animal rights activists that, this race isn't great for these dogs, their legs, their feet, all that sort of stuff. But I don't know, I'm a huge dog lover, and these dogs seem pretty darn happy. I mean, look at those tails. And this is not Pele, my dog, a miniature golden doodle, or Donut, his dog, trying to run the Iditarod. These are dogs that are bred to do this.
I'm guessing Pele would not make it very far.
No, Pele could barely do a 10-mile run or jog, much less this. But
Pele has a pretty good life, as you might imagine. You're over the time change from Vietnam. We'll be back here tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
In the meantime, before then, Chris Wallace has on Larry Kudlow tomorrow. Ran into Mr. Kudlow. He's got some very interesting things to say about the president's budget that is coming up, including when President Trump wants to balance the budget.
I think it's going to be a while.
Yeah. Might be a little while, and Chris will dive into that as well. News continues from New York. A lot on Jussie Smollett, and also R. Kelly now out of jail once again. See ya.
Well, President Trump starting his weekend at Mar-a-Lago with the border battle on his mind. The president tweeting earlier today about the apprehensions of a large number of illegal immigrants trying to cross into the country. That as a federal judge has ruled to expand a class action lawsuit over the controversial crackdown on the border last year. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new hour of America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Schunk.
I'm Marthel Neville. The decision potentially dealing a legal blow to the White House as it faces other lingering issues like ongoing trade negotiations with China. As he left yesterday in D.C., President Trump addressing concerns on whether the two sides could reach a deal.
I think they're doing well, but if it happened that way, we'll do even better. We'll do very well either way, with or without a deal. I'm confident. But if we don't make a very good deal for our country, I wouldn't make a deal.
Ellison Barber is live in South Florida, not far from the president's Mar-a-Lago estate with more. Ellison, hi.
Hi, Arthel. So in January, an inspector general issued a report saying that far more migrant families were separated than initially known. They said that according to this IG report, they said that the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security actually began separating migrant families nearly a year before the so-called zero tolerance policy was officially announced. And that, according to the IG, meant that a lot more families were impacted than the 2,800 initially thought. The ACLU said that those families should be allowed to join a previous class action lawsuit that they filed. And the federal judge in California, the one who ordered the administration to reunite roughly 2,800 migrant families in June, agreed with them. The previous filing did not include parents whose children were released from custody before June 26, 2018. The judge says that parents separated from their children on or after July 1st, 2017 can and should be counted. In his ruling, Judge Sabraw wrote this, quote, "The hallmark of a civilized society is measured by how it treats its people and those within its border. That plaintiffs were alerted to the existence of a handful of parents within this group and that subsequent investigation by the OIG confirmed that there was not just a handful, but potentially thousands of parents in this group, does not render modifications of the class detention unfair, Rather, modifications of the class detention fall squarely within the confines of Supreme Court precedent. The White House has not responded to our request for comment on this particular ruling. Of course, all of this is happening as trade talks with China seem to now be stalling. Chinese government officials are reportedly pushing back against the deal. Some are said to be upset about U.S. comments and actions outside of trade, such as the U.S. flying B-52 bombers near disputed territory in the South China Sea. Others are reportedly concerned President Trump could make a big show about a deal and then walk away, which is what they think happened at the summit in Hanoi. Here's what President Trump's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, had to say.
I've heard these stories. The United States wants to make a quick deal to help the stock market. That's just nonsense. The president is optimistic, but as he has said many times, Stu, if the deal doesn't work for the United States and our long-term interests, whether it's technology, IP, theft, enforcement, commodities, tariffs, if the deal doesn't work for America's long-term interests, then it's not our deal.
Chinese President Xi Jinping was set to meet with President Trump here in Mar-a-Lago sometime this month, but now the Chinese have taken that visit off of President Xi's calendar. Arthel.
Okay, Ellison Barber, thank you very much. Eric?
Arthel, how do you want the government to spend your tax dollars? We'll soon find out because all eyes are on the president's 2020 budget proposal. That's set to be unveiled on Monday. In all my previous spending blueprints, the president's plan will propose cuts to a range of domestic programs that are favored by lawmakers in both parties. But it is not expected to make any cuts in Medicare or Social Security. Jillian Turner has been following the story and the numbers from our Washington bureau.
President Trump's set to release his 2020 budget plan on Monday, just 2 days from now, and a whole month past the statutory deadline. The White House blames the delay on the partial government shutdown that lasted for 5 weeks, though no one seemed to be paying particularly close attention. Greasing the skids for the rollout, the president gave the state of the national economy a glowing review just yesterday.
The economy is very, very strong. If you look at the stock market over the last few months, it's been great. And certainly since my election, it's up, getting close to 50%.
Nancy Pelosi Steve was looking like a fool.
After Jussie Smollett indicted on 16 felony counts following his allegations that he was the victim of a hate crime in Chicago.
The House passed and that the president will stick with strict spending caps imposed years ago, despite the fact that lawmakers have consistently found workarounds with their own special budget deals. The Speaker of the House says she's unimpressed with the plan and that last year's Trump tax cuts need to go.
This has to be revisited, not just because of the unfairness of it, but also the impact that it has on the budget and what it means in terms of meeting the needs of the American people.
The president has earmarked $750 billion for defense spending that includes backfill funds for the border wall. He believes under the current proposal he'd have enough money to complete it by the end of 2020. Overall, the plan increases requests for some agencies but cuts others, most notably the EPA. The next step for the budget, it goes to the House and Senate, and Capitol Hill insiders say they're likely to end up debating the president's proposal until the next spending deadline. That's October 1st. This means another government shutdown will become a real possibility yet again in just a few months. Eric?
All right, Jillian, thanks so much. Arthel?
And Eric, for more on this, let's bring in Jeff Mason. He's the White House reporter, a correspondent for Reuters. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Arthel.
All right, let's take a look at this. So here you have it with a record-setting national debt of $22 trillion. How can GOP lawmakers support a border wall project that most Americans don't want? Intel and security experts say a wall is not the most effective way to increase border security. Those same experts don't deem it a crisis at the southern border, and the president's national emergency declaration denied by Congress. So how do especially fiscally conservative Republicans support funding for a president-promised wall?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that you really have to direct to them. But I think it's a good one, and I think that Democrats will be asking the same thing. I also think, though, that this budget proposal that comes out on Monday is not going to dramatically change the debate about the wall in Congress. It's not going to affect the opinions of Democrats who have been opposed to it. It will probably bring back up some discussion about the amount of money that is going towards it, but budgets, be it from Republican or Democratic presidents, even without the controversial proposal that this one includes about the wall, often, almost always land in Congress sort of with a thud and are dead on arrival.
And then you have the ask for the border wall funding will be juxtaposed to proposed spending cuts in foreign aid and food stamps. So again, how will that sell?
Well, that's it. I mean, the budget is likely to, as your reporter was just saying before, have an increase or proposed increase in defense spending, but a decrease in social programs such as food stamps, such as in foreign aid. Is not a social program, but that's a program that a lot of people think is really important for foreign policy for the United States. So those types of things also are not going to be supported by Democrats, and there will probably be some Republicans who are upset about that as well.
Hey, so Jeff, according to your reporting, what's the prognosis on the passage of the budget overall?
Well, I just think it's unlikely that it's going to do anything. I mean, I think it's the most likely scenario is, as your reporter was saying before, as we get into the fall, and it's Congress that determines the money that is spent. The Congress has the power of the purse. They have to pass spending bills. The budget is essentially a document that lays out the president's priorities, and it creates an opportunity to talk about those priorities. And the wall is obviously one of them. So he'll talk about that, and they'll talk about trying to get funding for that. But in general, the prospects of this budget passing are slim to none.
Well, that's not good news. And if the budget doesn't pass, I mean, you just heard Jillian Turner saying she mentioned another government shutdown come October 1st. I mean, is that likely to happen again?
Well, it's a ways away, and
yeah.
I think that the Republicans and the White House in particular, realized that was not a win for them. And in October we'll be getting even closer and closer to that 2020 election. You'll have people, Democratic candidates in particular, running around Iowa and New Hampshire, and if they're campaigning in those states, and if there's a government shutdown again, that would give them some fodder to criticize Republicans. But it's right to say that it's still a possibility. It certainly is, because that will be the next deadline for getting some spending bills passed. And if they don't manage to do that beforehand, then that's what it would trigger.
Okay, back to today. How does a healthy economy factor in?
Well, that's a good question, and the White House views the healthy economy, number one, as a big accomplishment of President Trump, but number two, as something that they believe is going to continue. Now, there are some question marks over that, and the reason they want it to continue, number one, is because it's good for the United States, but it's also good for President Trump politically. It's also good for the sort of prognosis that they put in this budget for all of the numbers, to make the numbers work. But if you look at the jobs report from February, and you look at some of the other sort of factors affecting the economy lost some momentum at the end of last year and hasn't been as strong in the beginning of this year. So there are some who are questioning some of the rosier forecasts that this budget will include about long-term economic growth.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on it. White House correspondent for Reuters, Mr. Jeff Mason, thank you.
My pleasure.
And a programming note for our Fox News Channel viewers and listeners on the radio. Tune in tomorrow for more reaction from the Trump administration. Chief White House Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow will sit down with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday to discuss trade talks with China, as well as the president's budget. That is at 2 and 7 p.m. Eastern here on the Fox News Channel. I think it's 1:14 on the radio.
Serious? I listened to it in the car.
Check your local listings for the airtime in your local station.
Glad you remember all our Sirius satellite listeners, too. Well, Paul Manafort will learn if the next federal judge will treat him as gently, say critics, as Judge T.S. Ellis did this past week. The former Trump campaign chairman, as you know, was sentenced to 47 months in prison this week, a sentence that was harshly criticized for being too light. He could have faced up to 24 years behind bars. And next week, he will be sentenced again in a separate illegal lobbying case. All this as the president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, well, he now is suing his former employer, the Trump Organization, claiming that he is owed money for unpaid legal services. Garrett Tenney has been following all of this from a Washington bureau, and whether Manafort's going to get hammered or get off lightly. Hi, Garrett.
Well, Eric, Paul Manafort dodged a bit of a bullet this past week, as you mentioned. Instead of the 19 to 24 years in prison that he was looking at, he was sentenced to just 47 months. Despite that, a source close to his legal team says they are still concerned about next week's sentencing. Manafort is facing another 10 years in prison on charges of conspiracy against the United States, which he pleaded guilty to back in September. And Judge Amy Berman Jackson could decide to add this second sentence to Manafort's prison time or have them run concurrently. This week, after testifying on Capitol Hill, former Trump attorney Michael Cohen sued the Trump Organization for millions of dollars in legal fees he's incurred during investigations by Congress and the special counsel, claiming they are owed to him as part of his contract with the Trump Organization. On Friday, President Trump dismissed the lawsuit, though.
It's the most ridiculous suit I've ever seen. Bad lawyer. I had a bad lawyer.
Cohen is also now facing questions from House Republicans about his congressional testimony. Fox News has learned that staff for Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff traveled to New York at least 4 times to meet with Cohen and met with him for more than 10 hours before his public testimony last month. Republican Congressman Mike Turner argues those meetings could amount to coaching a witness.
These happened behind closed doors, solely with Democrat Adam Schiff's staff. No one else was present at the time. Over 10 hours of work with Michael Cohen before he came out and publicly testified. I think that the public deserves answers as to what happened during these sessions, what was discussed.
Turner is now demanding answers from Cohen's legal team, but a House Intelligence Committee spokesman defended the meetings, describing them to Fox News as completely appropriate and a routine part of every serious investigation. Eric?
All right, Garrett, thanks so much. Arthel?
You got it.
Venezuela's embattled President Nicolas Maduro continues to cling to power as the U.S. and dozens of other countries refuse to recognize his authority.
There is only one president of Venezuela right now, and that is Juan Guaido. The Venezuelan people are to be commended for using the rule of law to transition as civilized people do.
And just today, there were 3 more nationwide demonstrations to force Maduro's resignation. So is enough pressure building to force him out? And if so, when? Plus, Senator Bernie Sanders taking his message to Iowa as several other White House hopefuls hit the campaign trail this weekend in another big state that can influence the elections. We'll tell you where they are and the message they're sending.
We are going to invest in our young people. We're going to invest in jobs and education, not jails and incarceration.
The crisis is intensifying amid widespread blackouts in that country. This is opposition leader Juan Guaido. Today is calling for nationwide protests, all part of his campaign to try and force disputed President Nicolas Maduro to step down. Lawmakers here at home are vowing to keep up the pressure.
They're destabilizing our closest partners in South America. They're driving violence in Central America with the drugs that they're helping to ship, which is, of course, exacerbating illegal migration. They're pumping cocaine into our streets. They're providing Putin a military foothold in our hemisphere. They're providing gold to Iran. The Maduro regime is a clear danger and threat to the national interest, and I would argue national security of the United States.
Kitty Logan is following all this and the latest developments from London. Hi, Kitty.
Hi, Eric. So opposition supporters are back out on the streets of Caracas today. They are hoping to keep up that pressure to eventually force the government to step down. And today those demonstrators rallied in the west of the city in a pro-government area close to the presidential palace. They're angry about shortages of supplies and blame the government for many of the day-to-day problems that people are experiencing. And to add to that misery, there were widespread power cuts across Venezuela this week, lasting for more than 24 hours, and some areas are still without electricity. Now, opposition supporters blame corruption in the government and mismanagement of essential resources. The government says the electricity supply was sabotaged. Of course, there are large numbers of police out on the streets in riot gear at these protests. There were already some minor clashes ahead of the rally today, and supporters of the president are also out organising a protest today to compete with that opposition rally. Those demonstrators calling on the US to lift sanctions. And amid these political protests, Eric, there is the reality of day-to-day life for many people here. It's becoming increasingly difficult as they struggle to purchase even basic daily supplies. And of course, all that has become much worse since they're without power. Back to you, Eric.
Yeah, and many hope the clock is ticking for Maduro, but we should see. Kitty Logan, thank you. Arthel.
Eric, well, the road to the White House winds through Austin, Texas this weekend. Several Democratic presidential candidates, including Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, they're speaking out at the annual South by Southwest Festival. Meanwhile, Senator Bernie Sanders is making headlines in Iowa after pledging to fully support the eventual Democratic nominee.
I am going to work as hard as I can, and I think we stand a really good chance of winning this nomination. But if we do not win, I will strongly support the Democratic nominee and hope and believe that others feel exactly the same way. Donald Trump must be defeated.
Jeff Paul is tracking the candidates from our West Coast Bureau. Hi, Jeff.
RFL, it'll be a packed day for Democratic presidential hopefuls who are all running campaigns, as you just heard, with a strong message to beat Trump in 2020. We'll start in Austin, Texas at South by Southwest. That's where several Dems will be making appearances and speaking at the Music and Tech Festival. Senator Elizabeth Warren is set to speak later this afternoon, and Senator Amy Klobuchar just wrapped up her talk. Now, she took aim at President Trump, saying the American people are being governed by chaos instead of opportunity. Klobuchar was also asked about the direction of the Democratic Party.
Yes, there's differences in our party. I think that's healthy that we're not all lockstep. And we certainly are at a moment in time where we need new ideas in our party. So you can have new ideas from the left, from the middle, from the right, but you've got to be open to new ideas.
In Iowa, Bernie Sanders is campaigning today at the state fairgrounds in Des Moines. This is his third campaign event in the state this week. Sanders continues to focus on the working class as well as younger voters, targeting issues like rising student loan debt. He also told the crowd in Iowa he wants to make sure big companies pay their share in taxes, specifically targeting Jeff Bezos and Amazon. Sanders also went after the president.
When Donald Trump shut down the government, 800,000 American workers lost their paychecks. The time is long overdue when we had a government, a president, and a Congress who stood up for the working class of this country.
Now, something interesting we're also tracking is a somewhat mysterious email that was sent to Beto O'Rourke supporters. It asked them to sign up to be the first to hear O'Rourke's next big announcement. Many have speculated he might run for president, and RFL, this so far could be the biggest clue yet.
They're going to figure out how many people reply to see what he has going for him. We know the trick. All right, Jeff Paul, thank you.
We'll be watching.
Yeah, Eric.
And meanwhile, overseas, ISIS, we're told, on the brink of defeat in eastern Syria. And the U.S. planning a drawdown of troops. The Trump administration seeking help from our European allies to keep the caliphate from resurging. But those allies, well, some of them have yet to commit. Why is that? We'll take a look. And this as the president says he is disappointed that Kim Jong-un's government may be preparing a missile site for a new possible launch. What message might the Korean dictator be sending? General Jack Keane is here and will weigh in on all those hot spots just ahead. Plus, police say that he staged that infamous alleged attack on himself. Now the grand jury has decided just how much legal trouble actor Jussie Smollett may be in. The details of that indictment against him as America's News headquarters rolls on. Officials are trying to secure help from some of our key European allies in the fight to oust ISIS from the last held bit of territory in eastern Syria. This is a target date that was set for yesterday passes without any commitments to add troops from the UK, France, or Germany to send the military forces in to try and keep the radical Islamic terrorist group from fully returning. General Jack Keane is here. He's a retired four-star general, also chairman of the Institute for the Study of War and Fox News senior strategic analyst. General, why aren't some of our allies, I mean, they're our allies, how come they're not ponying up, especially if you point to the UK and Germany?
Well, they are. Let me give you what the state of play is. Secretary Pompeo directly involved. General Dunford, chairman of Joint Chiefs, also directly involved. The British and the French are on the ground with us right now, and they have been for years. They have unofficially committed to continue to keep forces there. Probably not at the same size that they have right now, just like we're not keeping ours at the same size. They've also gone to the countries, and I think this is very appropriate, that have been attacked by ISIS, either by name or directed attacks, and that is Belgium, Norway, and Germany. The Norwegians will probably commit. The Belgians and the Germans are not going to. The Norwegians had some forces down at a base in Syria. If you bring that map up, I can show you where.
Yeah, you said it's the map. Before we do the map, how come Germany and Belgium wouldn't do that? I mean, they've been attacked, as you said, in the name of ISIS. They had that terrible bombing in Belgium.
The leadership in these countries is so feckless, I'm not even sure they defend their own people, much less somebody else's. And that's just the way it's been for a number of years now. So none of that surprises me. But the countries that are stepping up are the ones that continuously do.
Wouldn't that encourage more attacks potentially? I mean, look at Belgium. My dad was shot down in the B-24 over Belgium. 2 of his crewmen died on April 12, 1944, protecting that country against the Nazi menace.
Well, ISIS certainly goes where it can to take advantage of the situation there. Largely, those attacks took place in that country because of the fact that they're breeding grounds for radical Islamists. There's entire neighborhoods that are not policed. And the fact that they're not going to stand up to this does not surprise me in the least.
Some have said, of course, that the neighborhoods are policed, and there's been criticism about that. But meanwhile, the map. Study for the Institute of the Study of War. You send us this map. I mean, that caliphate has been shrunken by how much, and how do we prevent it from returning, General?
Well, if you look at the map, what's in the purple in the eastern part of Syria, that's the U.S.-led coalition partners. That's the area that we control, with 60,000 Syrian Democratic Forces on the ground, opposed by somewhere in the neighborhood about 20,000 ISIS, most of whom are now in hiding because the territory that they once occupied, we've taken away from them. And that little circle down there at the bottom of the map is sort of a half circle in purple. That's where our base TANF is located. And so the missions that are going to continue will be in the northern part of the purple. In the northeast, there's going to be a safe zone between Turkey and Syria. And our forces and others will help maintain that safe zone. And then throughout the entire purple area is where ISIS is hiding, and we'll keep pressure on them so they do not retake territory. And then the third mission is in that half circle in the southern part of Syria there in the middle of the map. That's where the base is, and we'll operate that base, and we'll likely have some Norwegians there and some others to do that. And the reason for that base is to block the land bridge, the southern land bridge that Iran wants to establish through Iraq, through southern Syria, so that they can encroach on Israel. So that's kind of what's in front of us in the months ahead.
You just hit on a very important point. Do you think that we can stop Iran's expansion and Iran's aggression with that base and with the number of troops that we'll have?
That can't do it by itself, Eric. It's a very good question. We need to keep the pressure on Iran in terms of the sanctions. Also staying in eastern Syria, in that purple area I described to you, 70% of the oil fields are there. And if we left, Iran would get all those oil fields and they'd be able to fund the war in Syria, the war in Yemen, just based on the revenue from those oil fields alone.
And you think 400 troops, 400 U.S. troops are enough to keep the pressure on?
Well, they're not going to be involved in directly doing that. There's 60,000 Syrian Democratic Forces, which we provide assistance to. We help them do the planning, and we coordinate for this. During that whole purple area we showed, we control the airspace. And those 400 U.S. and also Brits and French will coordinate for those strike fighters to maintain the control of that airspace, which is absolutely decisive.
And meanwhile, on the other side of the world, I mean, what is Kim Jong-un up to? There are reports that he's preparing that missile site. The cranes are back in, the trucks are back in, perhaps ready to launch another missile at some point. Is this a defiant message to the world in the aftermath of the summit? What's his calculation?
Well, I think, North Korea kind of blew this summit. I mean, they should have known that Trump was not going to fall into the same pattern that previous presidents did and give him sanction relief. I'm stunned that he really put that on the table. So this is face-saving in my understanding of the Asian culture. He came home with his tail between his legs a little bit, and the fact of the matter is he's pushing back here for that face-saving. I don't think we should make too much out of it, because I really believe it's in his interest to negotiate with us, and I think it's in our interest to negotiate with them, and I believe those negotiations will get back on again.
Yeah, the Federation of American Scientists did a study this past week saying that he's never going to give up his nuclear capabilities. Do you think Kim Jong-un ever will do that? What do you foresee?
I don't think we know. I mean, the intelligence community certainly is united on this. They don't think so. And they're looking at current patterns, and it's hard to forecast the future, and the intelligence guys will be the first to admit that. I think what will be telling if he's really willing to make some concessions and we can guarantee some security for him in a sense of eventual peace treaty, hopefully pulling the armies away from each other on a demilitarized zone. And this will take some time because in that culture, they're going to need trust, before they're going to make a decision like that. So I don't think anybody in the administration knows, Eric, whether they're truly going to denuclearize. And Kim Jong-un himself may not be in a position yet to make that decision. But look, what we got to do, and I think is the right thing, is let's continue to talk. Let's continue to negotiate. That's certainly better than where we were 18 months ago when he was threatening the use of these weapons against the American people and flying them over Japan on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's for sure. And those negotiations will be continuing on a lower level than the president.
I hope so, yes.
They will be. General Keane, always good to see you. Thank you, of course, for
good
your
talking to you,
service our
Eric.
country, of course. And tomorrow we'll have a lot more on this. National Security Advisor John Bolton, he'll join Maria Bartiromo on Sunday Morning Futures. They will, of course, discuss the latest developments, as we just did, with North Korea and Venezuela, and what's next after the fall of ISIS in Syria. Maria and John Bolton, 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on the Fox News Channel. Arthel?
Check it out. Well, a grand jury in Chicago has indicted Empire actor Jussie Smollett on 16 felony counts for an alleged attack that police say he staged. Jackie Heinrich is live from our New York City newsroom with the details. Jackie?
Hi, Arthel. Each of those 16 counts is a Class 4 felony. If he's convicted, Smollett could face up to 3 years in prison. The Empire actor got 8 counts from what he told the officer who initially took the report, and 8 more for what he later told a detective. Smollett's attorney said he didn't expect a grand jury would bring 16 separate counts, calling it overkill and an attempt to distract people from the leaking of false information by the Chicago Police Department. Chicago police opened an internal investigation after allegations of leaks surfaced. But Smollett, who is black and openly gay, told police back in January he was the victim of a hate crime. He claimed he was attacked by 2 masked men as he headed home from a Subway restaurant, claiming they beat him, poured a chemical on him, and said racial and homophobic slurs. He also said the men put a rope around his neck and shouted, "This is MAGA country," a reference to President Trump's campaign. Police said the 36-year-old staged the attack and paid 2 brothers $3,500 to carry it out. Smollett maintains his innocence.
This is an outrage. The fact that he maintains his innocence makes it even more outrageous. 16 counts. I defy anybody to find any indictment anywhere for being a victim of a hate crime, basically.
Chicago police said Smollett took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career, saying he was unhappy with his pay. The department spokesman tweeted, as Superintendent Johnson stated, allegations against Mr. Smollett are shameful, and if proven, they're an affront to the people of Chicago who embraced him as a neighbor and respected him as a role model. We stand behind the work of detectives and refer any comment on indictment to prosecutors. Producers of his show Empire removed his character from the last couple episodes of that season to prevent further distractions on set. Smollett is scheduled to be arraigned on March 14th. Arthel.
Jackie Heinrich, thank you.
And R. Kelly is free today once again after spending 3 days in jail over his unpaid child support charges. That embattled singer taken back into police custody on Wednesday during a hearing. That's when prosecutors said that he owed more than $160,000 to his ex-wife. The Cook County Sheriff says the amount was paid today, and that allowed for Kelly to be sprung from jail. Well, last month, the singer, as you may know, was charged with 10 counts of sexual abuse, and he spent a weekend in jail until a Chicago business owner paid his $100,000 bail. Kelly has pled not guilty to all of the charges.
The House advances an election overhaul bill. If it passes, this would impact the 2020 presidential election. What's the Democratic reaction? Also, hear why Republicans say it misuses money from taxpayers.
We can do better, and I hope today we have a big voice to say taxpayers should not pay for our elections. That politicians...
Emergency landing there. Nearly 200 passengers were evacuated by slides after the crew reported smoke and a possible fire that was indicated in the cargo hold. The plane, Air Transat Flight 942, was on its way from Montreal down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, when it was diverted to Newark about 8:30 this morning. The Boeing 737 landed safely, as you can see, and 2 of the 189 passengers reported minor injuries in the deplaning. Officials say that there was no fire found on board, and they are still investigating the cause of that reported smoke.
Get back to politics now. The House passing a sweeping election overhaul bill. It takes on campaign finance, ethics, and voting rights. While House Speaker Nancy Pelosi outlines her support, Republicans like the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, criticized the legislation for taking taxpayer money and giving it to political campaigns.
The idea of H.R. 1 is going to take taxpayers' money to give to politicians. The idea that if you're convicted of a felon, you get to vote. Even if you're convicted of a voter fraud, you're now going to be able to vote. I do not believe this bill is going to go anywhere.
Yes, it is a power grab on behalf of the people. But let us look to the Senate and say, when we pass this bill, it's not just what happens on this floor. It's the message it sends to the American people.
Let's break it all down with our political panel. Chris Wilson, the former Director of Research, Analytics, and Digital Strategy for the Ted Cruz presidential campaign, and Capri Cafaro, a former Democratic member of the Ohio State Senate and executive in residence in the School of Public Affairs at American University. Good to have both of you.
Absolutely. Good afternoon.
Okay, so we're going to give you a chance to say what's bad about it, but I want to start with what's good about the package. We'll start with you, Capri, and then Chris, you go.
Well, I mean, any time that you are dealing with the ability to make things more transparent in campaign finance, for example, making sure that 501c4 contributions, 501c4 is the IRS tax code for basically political advocacy. Right now, contributions to that don't have to be disclosed. Having to make that disclosed is good. Transparency is important when it comes to who is giving to campaigns and advocating for either an issue or a candidate. So I think that's a good thing. And certainly being able to give money, and we'll get into the issue about campaign finance and giving tax dollars in a second, but being able to support the states. As a former state legislator and a former minority leader, I can tell you that our individual boards of elections that have jurisdiction over facilitating elections are really up against it, don't have enough resources to do their job properly. So to have the federal government support their efforts helps protect the vote and helps enable those folks to do their job.
Interesting. Chris, what do you say?
Well, I couldn't disagree more. I mean, this bill should really be called the Politician Protection Act. The fact that Democrats think that there's public support for taking taxpayer dollars and paying for political elections is just remarkable to me.
I didn't say I supported that.
So hang on one second. Wait, no, guys. Hang on for 1 second.
But it's a further indication of the Democrats' slide to the left.
Chris, you wait too, just for 1 second, because I'm going to give you, I know you don't like the bill, and that's fine. But I want to know, is there anything in there good? I said we want to start with that, then we'll go to the pitfalls.
No, there really isn't. I mean, I could go through a point by point.
Then go ahead on and
why
criticize then. Go for it.
Okay.
You got the floor.
Well, it guts the First Amendment. But let me get to the point about exposing making transparent the donations to 501c4. The reason why that was initially allowed for was to protect those people who wanted to support the civil rights movement in the Deep South. And whenever you had racist district attorneys hauling civil rights attorneys and civil rights organizations in to try and expose the donors to those organizations so that for reasons that they needed to be protected. So the reason why those protections are in place is because not always is support of a group that may stand up for the rights of certain minorities a positive thing. And so sometimes protections are important.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No. The ability to keep those donations transparent is a positive thing. I mean, to keep them private, I'm sorry, is a positive thing. The point is if you want a good thing on it, I would say again, the good thing is it exposed the further slide of the Democratic Party to the left, and I think it becomes ultimately a campaign issue in the 2020 election for Republicans. So I don't think this is something that's going to be positive in any case.
So Capri, you just heard Chris say this thing is just bollocks. It's just horrible, and any attempts to make sure that everyone's vote counts and there's transparency and no hanky-panky at the polls is just not a good idea.
Well, obviously, I disagree with the fact. I mean, we do need to make sure that everyone's vote counts as long as they are indeed a citizen. I think that it is important to make it easier for people to vote, not harder. But obviously, we want to make sure that there isn't fraud. Now, let me say this. As a Democrat, I do have some concerns about a handful of things. I think that there is a legitimate argument about allowing tax dollars to support political campaigns, public financing is not something that is unique. There are states and individual municipalities that do it, but I understand that argument. But, you know, if you wanted to cap campaign finance contributions, you then end up getting into a First Amendment argument. So how do we figure out a way to get money out of politics? That's going to be a continued argument. I think that there are some issues when it comes to, for example, requiring basically everybody to register to vote. I do think it should be individuals' choice on whether or not they want to register to begin with. And so I do think that it's a mixed bag. I do think that it is a political play. I think it is one for Democrats to get on record about their priorities and to put Republicans on record saying that, you know, basically trying to paint them as people that are not supportive of transparency and campaign finance and ethics. I don't think this is going to go anywhere. I think this is more of a political exercise.
Fair enough. You had some pros and cons. That's the way we like it. And we're just going to show some of the major provisions while I ask Chris to give me one final answer here. So if this is not the answer to improving the nation's election system, ridding it of exposure to fraud, making sure that every American's vote counts, then what is the answer?
Well, I think we've moved in a certain direction toward the right answer. I mean, some of it is transparency, and I do agree that transparency in of itself is a good thing, but I think there are certain organizations that should be protected from that transparency for the reasons I pointed out. That was important, like I said, during the civil rights movement. But moving from a standpoint of counting every vote, yeah, that's absolutely essential. But what this bill doesn't do is protect against things like we saw happen in California with vote harvesting, or even what we saw happen in North Carolina, which we've had a new election cause in North Carolina 9. And those are the things that have to be protected.
Chris, I'm sorry to cut you off. Sorry, Capri. I've got to go hitting the computer. Capri Cafaro, Chris Wilson, thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Good debate, guys. Stay right here. We'll be back after this break.